This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
Thank you very much, Sietske, for your introductions, and thank you very much, Sietske and Niall, for the possibility to present my paper here. My topic is the reform of knowledge, so I've adjusted the title a little bit. It's more easy now. Reform of knowledge and translation of devotional literature within the Hartlib Circle. The correspondence network of Samuel Hartlib, who lived from circa 1600 until 1662, was an important platform for the international circulation of knowledge in the 17th century. Participants in the Hartlib Circle exchanged information on subjects ranging from education, medicine, chemistry and alchemy through to technical fields such as instruments. It is already well known that writings on medicine and chemistry, notably by Van Helmont, on which topic Sietske is working, these writings were translated within this circle. What has hardly been known until now, however, is that the network of Hartlib also served as a platform for the translation of devotional literature. I have recently discovered that the network within the Hartlib Circle made efforts to have this kind of literature, which aimed to lead people to and guide them in a life dedicated to God. So this network translated this kind of literature. The efforts particularly concerned literature from the Puritan movement in England. Though the word Puritanism is a label that has been applied to various kinds of groups, the common characteristic of all these groups is the concern for a radical devotion of one's life to God. This expressed itself, for example, in severe self-examination of one's spiritual state, as well as in a strict observance of the Sunday, the Sabbath, with its fixed set of devotional activities, like reflection on the worship service, prayer and Bible reading. Robert K. Merton in the 1930s defended the thesis that Puritanism was a major stimulus for the rise of science. Later scholarship has seriously questioned this thesis. The aim of my paper is not to reintroduce this thesis into scholarship, but rather, first, to show how the general aims of the Hartlib Circle were reflected in translation projects regarding Puritan devotional literature, and second, how participants of the circle combined their interest in devotional literature with their interests in natural philosophy, medicine, chemistry, alchemy, technical instruments, etc. More research is necessary to gauge the importance and role of translation of devotional literature within the Hartlib Circle. I will start this paper with an outline of Hartlib and his efforts for the reform of knowledge. Second, I will give an overview of the translation projects of Puritan devotional literature that took place within the Hartlib Circle. Finally, I would like to set out how these translation projects were connected with the aims and the projects of participants of the Hartlib Circle. I come now to the next heading, Hartlib and his efforts for the reform of knowledge. Samuel Hartlib was born in Elbing in East Prussia, which is now called Elbląg in Poland, and he was the son of a German father and an English mother. He grew up in a Reformed church and he studied at the Gymnasium of Brieg, now Czech in Poland, and also at the University of Königsberg, which is now Kaliningrad in Russia. And then he moved on to Emmanuel College in Cambridge. At the latter, he studied under John Preston, a Puritan theologian. In 1628, Hartlib fled to England to escape the 30 Years' War in Germany, and he stayed here until his death in 1662. In England, Hartlib became acquainted with the irenic theologian John Jury, which was already been mentioned by Niall, who made endeavors for a reconciliation of confessional differences between Protestant states across the whole of Europe as a way of reuniting Christendom. One of the means to reach reconciliation was the stimulation of practical divinity, the theological discipline that guides people to live for God, as opposed to polemical theology. As one element of a common creed for a united church of the Lutherans and the Reformed, Jorink proposed the Puritan devotional book The Practice of Piety of Louis Bailey. Hartlib became Jorink's London agent. He also came into contact with the Moravian educationalist Jan Amos Comenius. Hartlib published several of Comenius' Pansophic writings, Pansophic means all wisdom, in which Comenius proposed a method of universal education to attain universal knowledge. All things should be taught to all people in all ways, according to Comenius. In 1642, Comenius, Jorink, and Hartlib made a fraternal covenant to devote their lives to three goals. First, the procuring of religious peace. Second, the education of young people in Christian truths. And third, a complete reformation of methods of learning. The three men shared the expectation of an imminent kingdom of social, religious and political peace lasting for 1,000 years, which is called the theology of millenarianism. This kingdom of peace would include a substantial increase of knowledge that would lead to a restoration of the completeness of man's dominion over nature that had been lost at the fall. Hartlib and his brothers regarded the political upheaval of the English Civil War in the 1640s as an opportunity for a universal reformation. After the parliamentary victory in 1646, Hartlib established an office of address for communications. The objective of this office was to maintain registers of information on matters of religion and learning. Under the Commonwealth and Protectorate, Hartlib was influential in higher circles and was very productive. Through his network, he collected writings on a wide range of topics such as agronomy, silk manufacture, chemistry, and librarianship, and he made compilations of these, to which he wrote prefaces. According to Hartlib, all kinds of knowledge from the book of nature, the book of human reason, and from the book of the divinely inspired scriptural wisdom had become corrupted after the fall. Consequently, a new way of learning must be found. One should not keep his talents hidden or secret, but one should export them, trade with them, and send them abroad. Hartlib pleaded for a mercantilist conception of the business of learning. And he wrote about the duty of communication in spiritual and rational matters. The word communication had a religious sense. It was derived from the Latin communicatio, which had been coined in Christian late antiquity as a correct translation of the Greek koinonia, which means shared communion. And that word koinonia appears several times in the New Testament. Hartlib called for the excerpting of books and of the ordering of these excerpts in a synopsis, which would form a commonplace book on a range of topics. Several techniques for this textual reworking stood at his disposal. Hartlib was particularly taken by the method of the London schoolmaster Thomas Harrison, who had outlined a method for collating authors, their notions or axioms, and their discourses. The notions should be extracted and subsequently be connected by cross-references. Hartlib also developed a set of instructions for cataloging with indices. As a way of enhancing the communication of knowledge, Hartlib made use of scribal publication and participated in scribal networks. He regarded manuscript books as at least as important as printed books, and he agreed with the Puritan theologian Thomas Goodwin that, quote, "the best things are kept in men's studies in manuscripts," end quote, and that there were, quote, "more excellent manuscripts now because this age is so much improved," end quote. Hartlib stimulated the collecting of manuscripts by calling for the excerpting of sermons by means of shorthand, and he noted down the deaths of persons who had possessed large collections of manuscripts, including scientists, Puritan divines, and others. Within scholarly scribal networks, it was the attitudes of the gentleman collector that prevailed. Hartlib respected this decorum of privacy, politeness, courtesy, and sensitivity, but his ultimate goal was to make knowledge publicly accessible. For this reason, he did not hesitate to publish the letters or the books of others without their consent. I come now to my next section, the translation projects for devotional literature within the Hartlib Circle. And I will give several examples. In 1633, several Reformed theologians and ministers from Germany sent a request to the churches in Great Britain and Ireland, transmitted by John Dury. In this request, the German theologians asked their English and Irish colleagues to compile a collection of commonplaces, loci communes in Latin, or a systematic ordering of practical divinity, in Latin Systema Theologiae Practicae, and these commonplaces should be gleaned from English devotional literature. The German writers felt that English devotional literature, according to them, had reached a high pitch of perfection and was eminently suitable for common man. The Germans, however, regretted that this literature was, like a hidden treasure, not accessible to foreigners. They pointed to the fruits of the German translation of Bailey's Practice of Piety among many people. It had brought about a pure confession of the truth, they wrote. The proposed compilation, dus the Loci Communis or the Systema Theologiae Practicae, would be more profitable for German theologians than polemical theological writings would be. It would make them strive more earnestly for peace and love than for controversy. The request was signed, among others, by Peter Strijdhagen, and you see his name here at the left side, Paul Tossanes, and he is here, of Heidelberg, and also by Johannes Moriaan, who was a preacher at Cologne and first at Frankfurt and later at Cologne, and also by John Erlen and by others. And these men that I mentioned were participants of the Hartlib Circle. The best known of them is Johann Moriaan, and who was at first a Reformed minister in Cologne, in Frankfurt and Cologne, and afterwards he was active in making optical instruments as well. He was also participated in Comenius Panzophic efforts. He did alchemy, and he did something with Johann Rudolf Glauber's medicine. And he was an important person within the Hartlib Circle. The request of the German theologians was printed in 1645 by Dury, and you saw the title page at the at the previous slide, together with an answering promise of support by London ministers, and it was reprinted in 1658. From the 1630s until the 1660s, we find several references to the intended compilation of a book of commonplaces sifted from English devotional literature, and we find these references both in Hartlib's diary and in German publications. Hartlib's contacts reported to him that the Palatinate court chaplain, the already mentioned Peter Streithagen, was already compiling commonplaces of English devotional books, so a similar project. Jury welcomed the project of Streithagen as conducive to the efforts underway for a complete body of divinity in English, a wider project in which he himself was involved. This English compilation would then have to be translated into Latin for international digestion. In 1656, Hartlib noted in his diary that the compilation of Streithagen, who had died in 1653, was about to be printed. Presumably, this expected publication was identical with a book on the regeneration of individuals that did appear at Heidelberg in 1658 under Streithagen's name. The title was Homo Novus. Das ist ein neu gelehrt und gottseliges Traktätlein von des Menschen Wiedergeburt aus unterschiedlichen, der berühmtesten englischen Theologen durch Petrum von Streithagen zusammengetragen. So, there's a book on the new man about Wiedergeburt. That means in English regeneration. So the work of the Holy Spirit in individuals leading to conversion and to a God-dedicated life. And this book was compiled from English sources. The book was edited by two colleagues of Streithagen, namely Marcus Flocenius of Heidelberg and Paul Witz of Mannheim. In the dedication of the book to the Elector Palatine, they sought his support for the publication of a systematic collection of commonplaces of English devotional literature in German. Denn außer allem Zweifel ist es, dass wann unsere Zeiten so glückselig sein möchten, dass wir Deutschen ein ganzes Corpus oder Note Systema Theologiae Practicae per omnes locos communes, also a keyword, sive de quavis materia theologica, wenn wir auf solche oder noch kürzer und näher eingezogene Weise aus den besten englischen Skribenten zusammengetragen haben können, wie wir dann dafür halten, es wohl zu praktizieren stünde, wann man nur gebührlich mit der Sache verfahren wollte, solches ein Werk sein würde, damit der Christenheit am meisten gedient sein, welches auch den Ruhm aller anderen Menschenschriften fast übertreffen möchte. So they are very positive about the quality of such a compilation, and they think that it would have a great benefit for Christians. What's interesting for us here is that they sought, so the colleagues, the editors, the colleagues of Streithagen, they sought to reinforce their request by citing a recommendation made by Francis Bacon that such a compilation should be undertaken. Maßen der nicht nur vom Stamm und Geblüte, sondern auch von Kunst und Geschicklichkeit hochedel und weltberühmte englische Herr Verulamius, that is Francis Bacon, ganz vernünftiglich hiervon urteilet, indem schreibet, dass wann man die auserlesene und beste Observationes oder Lehrpunkten so hin und wieder zerstreuet in den gedruckten englischen Predigten über unterschiedliche Texte heiliger Schrift gefunden werden, in einer Kontinuation, hoc est gewisse richtige Ordnung brächte, solches das beste theologische Werk sein würde, welches seit der Apostelzeiten geschrieben worden. So they cite, they quote a recommendation of Bacon to collect the doctrines, the observationes, the Lehrpunkten from English sermons, and to order them, to bring them in good in a proper order. That Strijdhagen's colleagues made a request for a Systema Theologicae Practicae in Strijdhagen's compilation warrants the assumption that they and others did not regard the book of Strijdhagen as complete enough to be a body of divinity as intended by Jury. In another book of Strijdhagen, his 1652 translation of a book by the Puritan John Cotton, Flocanius and Witz, they were also the editors of this translation, they made a similar request, so also a request for a compilation. I come now to another translator within the Hartlib Circle, Theodor Haak, which was already mentioned by Felicity Henderson. He studied mathematics at Oxford, and he resided for some time at the household seminary of the Puritan minister John White in Dorchester. He was ordained as a deacon in the Church of England, and he served as a correspondent for the Elector Palatine and also as a diplomat for the English Parliament. Like Hartlib, Haak remained in England for the rest of his life. Also, he came from the Palatinate. Haak corresponded with Marin Mersenne of Paris, who was at the heart of a correspondence network on natural philosophy. Haak was involved in what has become now known as the 1645 group, the precursor of the Royal Society for the Improvement of Natural Knowledge, of which he was one of the founding members. He conducted research into oyster fishing, and he collected instruments and curious substances, including phosphorus. He invented a phosphorus lamp, and he found out how a magnet, which had lost its polarity, could be remagnetized. And you see the magnet here on the table, and he points to it. In addition, Haak was skilled and prolific as a translator. He translated the Dutch Bible translation of 1637 with inline renditions of its copious verse by verse marginal notes. He also translated John Milton's epic poem Paradise Lost, and he certainly translated several English Puritan devotional books, which all appeared in Germany. So he translated them into German. Strijdhagen and Haak were personally involved in translating, but other participants in the Hartlib Circle merely collected sources and instigated others to translate or to publish these. An example of this second category is Johannes Rulicius, who was also born in the Palatinate. He likewise studied under Preston at Emmanuel College, just like Hartlib. It was at the hands of Puritans whom we already have encountered, John Cotton of Boston and John White in Dorchester, that he received his practical training for the ministry. And afterwards he was a minister of the gospel at Heidelberg, as well as for the English, the German, and then finally the Dutch Reformed congregations in Amsterdam. There he kept in close contact with Comenius, who was at that time in Amsterdam, and both men collaborated in the educational efforts of Comenius, and Rulicius also participated in Comenius sessions in which spiritual visions were interpreted. Rulicius instigated Niklaas van Tudenhout to translate one of Haak's German translations of devotional books into Dutch. Rulicius was in close contact with Petrus Grebius of Wetravia in Germany. He stayed also with Cotton at Boston at the same time probably as Rulicius. And from Hartlib's diary we know that Rulicius gave Grebius a wealth of manuscripts of John Cotton's sermons in the year 1634. Grebius was Rulicius' successor as minister of the German congregation of Amsterdam in 1652. And he also instigated a translation. He instigated an Amsterdam publisher and a translator to translate the book by the Puritan, already mentioned Puritan Thomas Goodwin, into Dutch. I come now to my conclusion. In translations of English devotional literature and in sources regarding these translations that I have investigated, several of the aims of participants of the Hartlib Circle are reflected. First, the making of knowledge accessible to everyone that otherwise would remain hidden. This aim of Hartlib can be seen in the request of the German theologians to their English and Irish colleagues. Second, the ordering of information. This aim comes to the fore in the above mentioned request for a compilation, as well as in the dedication of Strijdhagen's book on regeneration, and here was a reference to Francis Bacon. It is striking that in this dedication the high quality of the proposed compilation is emphasized. And third, the reconciliation of Protestant confession. This goal is mentioned in the request of the German theologians. The translation of English devotional books then was an endeavor associated with several of the main aims of the Hartlib Circle. The examples that I have given show that Hartlib's network, with its scribal culture, served as a platform for the collecting of source text, for the production of translations, and for the instigation of translators and publishers. Members of the Hartlib Circle connected the translation of devotional literature with other religiously inspired efforts, including collecting money for religious refugees from the 30 Years' War in Germany. That translation project was, however, also combined with interests that may, from a modern point of view, not seem to be religiously inspired, or even to be in some kind of conflict with religion, like chemistry, alchemy, and medical investigation. The members of this circle seem to have regarded natural philosophy as a means of revealing God's benevolent providence, as was usual in that time, in order to incite themselves and others to piety, that is, to give glory to God. Thank you very much for your attention.